And now I've just got a message to say this Hangout is now live on air. Just as a recap for everybody, throughout 2016, we're running a year-long MOOC, a year-long course. Every month of the year, we look at a different tool or technology that's been used or could be used to enhance and enrich what we do in the training, L&D, people development world. During the month of May, this month, we've been looking at proximity beacons. What I want to do now is introduce Geoff Stead, formerly of Qualcomm, now with Cambridge English, I believe, Geoff. Geoff, if you could give us a little bit of a background on who you are, where you've worked, and what your particular experience is, because it is significant in the world of mobile. That'll probably help to set the stage for everybody else understanding why we've asked you to come along. So, Geoff, over to you.
Sure. And please drop a message into the chat window if the signal breaks. I was getting some bad connections there, and I'm not sure whether it's my side or yours. So my name's Geoff Stead. I currently work at Cambridge English, part of the university, but until very recently I was working for a big tech company called Qualcomm in California and in the UK, and before that I was working for a company called Tribal. I'm a software guy who builds learning tools. That's what I've done, what I've been doing for the last 20 years or so. The last 10 of those, it's been all about mobile, and most of it has been about trying to push mobile as far as you can or try innovative new tools. We built augmented reality, virtual reality, used beacons, a very diverse range of technologies. If you were able to see the video, it looks like the audio is going. You'd notice I'm sitting outside my house. So although I've done all sorts of fantastic things with mobile and traveled around the world, I haven't managed to keep my house keys together. So I was having a supper with my son. It's his birthday today, and this meal was late, so I came rushing back, and of course I left the keys at the restaurant with all my family. So at some stage during this call, the door might open and I might be able to get in. But you've got me outside in blustery, grey, wet Cambridge. Thankfully, not raining at the moment.
Well, yeah, thank you for joining us, Geoff. Sorry, Geoff, please do carry on.
Well, I guess over to you. I've built a couple of apps to do with beacons. I think we made what was one of the first learning apps using beacons because we were building native code and we were getting access to some of the earliest beacons that came out. We built a museum app at Qualcomm that lets you navigate around a museum. We've experimented with a range of different technologies. So I guess I'm very open to answer questions or help with any guidance. Let me know how I can help or what you'd like to know.
Cheers, Geoff. Thank you. To set the context of this, I've asked some fairly simple seed questions, and I'll start working through those now. They're really only there to get the ball rolling. So please, Rachel, Tom, if you've got any questions specifically to an idea that you've got or something you've tried or the level of this MOOC, and it's ask more questions and it's answered, which I think is quite a good thing, then please feel free to interrupt me, get my dumb questions out of the way and get to grips with what you really need to know. So until you do that, I'm just going to carry on with my dumb questions and hopefully they will add some value. So first thing, Geoff, what is, in its simplest of terms, a proximity beacon?
So it's actually very simple. It's like it's normally small plastic with a watch battery inside it. It doesn't have to be, but it's just like a little lighthouse. It's just a beacon. It sends out a little message that says, "I'm here. This is me." That's all it does. It sends out a little message. You can program how loud it shouts, and you can program how often it sends that message out. Maybe every 10 milliseconds, maybe every 20 seconds. But that's all it does. It just sends out a message saying, "Yo, I'm here," and then people build all sorts of software on top of that, and some beacons you buy come in with some extra wraparound services around that. But in principle, that's all it is. It's a small Bluetooth thing that sends out a very, very simple message. And the message is really that simple. It's just a "hello, I'm here." So people use it. It's great because it's very low data, very low battery. So with a little watch battery, it can last for anything between 2 months and a year and a half, 2 years, depending on how often you're sending the signal out. Battery the size of your iPhone battery that would last between 5 and 10 years, power it for 5 and 10 years. So people like them because you can stick them, you can embed them inside a bridge if you want, and you can have a little signal peeking out, giving you some information about the bridge. You can put them on keychains, and so when you're walking around, well, in fact, you could find your keys. You could have an app on your phone that would help you find your keys, which would have helped me today. You can take them and just stick them anywhere behind anything in a museum or in your house, and it doesn't take very much, and they're cheap. They probably cost sort of 5p to produce. Normally you can buy them for somewhere between £1 and maybe £25, depending on who's selling them and what's wrapped around it. But they cost negligible amount to produce. So that's what they are.
Geoff, I've seen quite a lot of examples of them being used in marketing and in commerce. I've read about them being used in that area. I've been on the receiving end of them being used in that area. But obviously the field that many of us are in this Hangout is around people development, training, learning and development, helping people do their jobs better or become better educated or better informed. You mentioned briefly then the museum. You could put them in museums, and I know that was something that you did with a previous employer for the museum that came along with that particular employer, Qualcomm. Now, not all of us probably have the luxury of having a museum attached to our business. How and where could you see these beacons, or are these beacons being used right now for developing an internal workforce?
So a huge amount of the work I've done recently is in mobile apps, mobile learning, things you can do with mobile. So which has moved me on a personal journey away from structured training, structured courses, and more into the realm of performance support, sort of on the moment, finding out things you need to know. And for that, beacons are perfect. So if you can think of any scenarios where people have used QR codes or anything that's a connect between virtual information, digital information, and real stuff, there's a place for beacons there. So piece of equipment, engineering equipment, you put a beacon behind it, and when you walk up to it, you'll get a menu on your phone that can give you access to the manuals or the help guides for that piece of equipment. So anything where there's potentially some knowledge sharing that's connected to a thing. A printer, a complicated printer, piece of hospital equipment, and it allows it to send out a little signal. So it's not that different from having a code on it that you would type into an app and finds the manual, except you don't need to type anything in. It's not that different to putting a barcode on it, but you don't need a barcode app. So it sort of fits that genre, and that for me is the thing where I think it's the most useful. You can add a bit of excitement to that because it's a beacon and it sends out a pulse. You can find things, you can locate things. So I know some schools have put them in different areas. There's the sort of reading zone, and there's different zones, and they've got their students to locate the thing because the signal's stronger and weaker, and they move around till they physically find stuff. Although I haven't seen that used in the L&D workplace learning as much as rather around the performance support. We partly picked the museum not because we needed a museum app, but because we were trying to find a thing that would work for our workplace that was about place and physical stuff. And most of our employees are engineers coding, and so there wasn't an obvious hook with a place or a physical stuff for us outside the museum. So we partly picked the museum to test the technology out because it was one of the areas we thought there would be a best fit.
So Geoff, you mentioned about moving around and proximity and geography and spacing and movement. I remember some moons ago when I worked at a big e-learning company here in the UK, they were working with a massive online shopping channel, and one of the things that they produced was a QR code treasure hunt / induction. They recently moved their studios. It was they filmed a lot from one area of the country to the other. It was a massive. I mean, it was a film studio sort of set out, and they used QR codes to give people information about where they were, and then give them a clue about where to move to next. I'm guessing that beacons could simplify that process even more because it wouldn't rely on people having to find the QR code, to see the QR code. Yeah. It wouldn't rely on them having to have an app. It wouldn't rely on them having to understand how to use the app. All they need to do, and I make it sound very simple, is to have a phone in their pocket and B, in the general proximity of where this beacon is, and the information comes to them rather than them having to try and extract it. Is that right?
That's almost all true. The only bit that's not quite true is in most cases you do still need an app, because you can beacons just send a message out, right? That's all they do. They don't do much else. It is possible to have a generic app that just listens for any beacons, and if it sees a beacon, it goes, here's something. But most people would shut those off just out of privacy issues. So and there is a bit of a handshaking. So some beacons require you to have installed the app that knows about those beacons, or to accept a security token when you first install the app to allow beacons to message you. You don't necessarily, for privacy reasons, you don't necessarily want anything throwing data at your app. So the most common scenario is you install an app either made specially for that scenario or a generic beacon catching app, and you give it some sort of permissions, or you allocate when you first install it, just on the privacy side. So what you said is true, but in most cases I've seen where it's part of a learning scenario, there is actually a dedicated app that's been made for it.
Now, what you've just said then is kind of music to my ears, because it validates that I hadn't misunderstood something.
You were just testing me, were you? Nice.
Testing a vendor, to be honest. I was testing a third party back in the summer of last year. It's probably, in fact, it was probably about a year ago. I bought one. I bought an Eddystone beacon, and for anybody that's not watched the video inside the level of the MOOC, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, Geoff. There seems to be two beacons vying for attention at the moment. The more longer-standing one is an iBeacon produced by Apple, and it's kind of slaved to Apple's ecosystem. The other one is Eddystone, not the Lighthouse, but a project by Google, an open source project that seems to be platform agnostic. It is able to send and receive more types of more data packets than iOS, than the iBeacon, and it's, amongst other things, it suggests, and this is where I kind of spent money, and if I'd known what I was doing I probably wouldn't have done, it suggests that you don't need an app in order for them to work. However, when I dug into this, and after I'd paid for them to be imported, after I dug into this, it seems that the end user has to change something on their phone to accept these incoming "hello, it's me" messages. So there still seems to be something that the end user has to consciously do. It's not just a case of I have a phone, I'm wandering around, and these messages are coming to me. There still seems to be something of a barrier, and whilst I understand that barrier is there for privacy and to stop malware or dodgy sites being sent, there does seem to be a need for the end user to do something in order to receive those non-app messages from Eddystone. Is that right, Geoff?
Yeah, and bear in mind that most of the hype around beacons has been around in retail, right? So what they do is they create a zone, and shops love to be able to send you a message when you walk past to say, promotion in our store, come here, buy jeans at half price. And actually, that's the first thing you block off as a user. So I don't. Although there's people making claims about that, I wouldn't get too excited about the ability to push things without people asking for it. And in fact, most of the actual message that gets pushed from beacons is really trivial. It's just a code or a single generic string. You can push a URL. It's a bit like a QR code, but in almost all cases, you're just pushing some sort of unique ID, and then the app goes and looks online to see what that unique ID means. Even if the people who are selling the beacon seem to imply that's not the case, almost always that is really the case. What's happened is you upload the picture to the web, and it associates it with the unique ID, and when people hit that, they have to be online to get the picture down again. So I haven't seen instances of really any meaty data being pushed, and that sort of defeats the purpose, because the purpose is super lightweight, long-lasting battery.
Yeah, unfortunately, I only that penny only dropped. I wish I'd had this Hangout a year ago. After purchasing a few of them, you're quite right. They didn't cost a lot to buy at all. they cost an absolute fortune to import from America with all the taxes and things that came with it. So what a lesson, Tom's laughing away there, a lesson learned. And being a Yorkshireman as well, I'm really averse to parting with money unless I have to. So it came as a bittersweet pill.
If you're still trying them out and playing with it, let me know afterwards, and I can send you a couple, because I have a bunch of old ones that we used from our museum, or that we didn't use from the museum. And I think I still have them around somewhere, so I'll post you a couple of the gimbal ones that we used, if you like. You mentioned two manufacturers of them. Actually, there's a bunch of manufacturers. If you just search online at the moment, there's probably 12, 15 different manufacturers of them floating around. Some sell an ecosystem, so the iBeacon piece, actually, they've wrapped their own software over the top, and it's the Apple one on top of it. So some sell an ecosystem, and typically the beacon's more expensive. Some just sell the beacon, and it's cheaper. The one we used is called Gimbal, Gimbal. It was, when I was at Qualcomm, it was an internal Qualcomm project. It's actually subsequently spun out. It's now a separate company. But we used the Gimbal ones, and they were fine. They did what we needed. Yeah, they're cross-platform. You write any app that can listen to it and sniff what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Geoff. Like I said, I wish I'd had this Hangout 12 months ago and saved myself a few bob. So let me just go back to my Q&A. We're rattling through these, which is brilliant. People are also dropping questions in. Tom's just asked a good question, which is has just been mentioned actually in the MOOC that we're running. One of the guys on there is undertaking the level, and then a couple of weekends ago happened to be wandering around his local shopping centre and stumbled across solar-powered beacons. So I just wondered, Tom's just asked if you've got any experience of using those.
I'd never heard of it until this moment, but it would work a treat, because they're really so low power that as long as you've got a small rechargeable battery and get occasional sunshine, that would work. I think it's a fantastic idea. Hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah. I think I may have got my wires crossed here, but he was the same guy that was saying that the vendor, the provider that he bumped into, had installed them in Raglan Castle, which I think it's I want to say it's in Wales, but I could be making myself look a fool there. But so I'm guessing if it's kind of light, open space, airy type of place, then they've got a good chance of being able to get that energy and be able to seek that energy out.
If you had outdoors beacons, that's fantastic. You can also, if you have space though, you can also just put slightly bigger batteries in them and then get one that lasts several years, and it doesn't cost you a huge amount. So I guess there's a bit of a cost consideration, and do you get enough sunshine in Wales? But it doesn't drag a lot of power. So yeah, probably is the same. Tom, very cool. I hadn't heard of that before. They are great for that outside type scenario. Works quite well, because what they do is they send a radial signal out. It's not a perfect circle. It's more like a kind of donut figure 8 kind of shape. But it's more or less a radial circle of signal. So if you've got an area where you have signal and no signal and signal and no signal, and it's in the open air, that could work quite well. You can get coverage sort of up to 40 meters, people claim. I've never really seen it go that far. It goes through walls fairly happily. It doesn't go through people. So if you've got an indoor space and the beacons are at sort of body level, actually 1 or 2 people in front of a beacon will block the signal entirely. Water and people, it doesn't go through well, but walls it does tend to go through to an extent. We struggled in our museum because we were trying to be very fine-grained about positioning. So we had a bunch of beacons around the museum. I don't know, we put probably 50, 60 beacons in the end in different bits of the museum, and we were trying to triangulate and find where people were inside the museum, and we were getting wild fluctuations on it, depending if somebody was standing in front of a beacon or not. So we ended up doing quite a few iterations before we got it right. We did get it right in the end. Rachel, you've asked about the museum project. I've spent the day trying, but not quite completing, to put together a blog post describing more detail of what we've done. There's a Vimeo, which I guess is the link Craig shared, which is me talking about it and showing an app. But I, this morning, posted a slightly longer case study on my blog, and in a day, as soon as I finish, I'll have a considerably longer one, which describes some of the details of the problems we were having and the ways we solved it. I'm happy to go into more detail now if you'd like, but I will post those.
Geoff, is that on Workload Mobile, it'll be?
It's on Workload Mobile. I'll look while we're talking here, and I'll post one link to the case study, which I put up this morning.
Okay, thank you.
And then there will be an article, but it'll be in a day's time. So if people are interested, if you wouldn't mind signing up to this, if you subscribe to it, you'll get an email automatically. Otherwise, I'll send Craig a link.
Thank you, Geoff. And I would certainly, for anyone that's listening that wants to keep, I want to say their finger on the pulse, but actually wants to keep kind of ahead of the curve of how people are using mobile, I can't recommend enough signing up to Work Learn Mobile and Geoff's Twitter feed as well. There are kind of two people that I look to in the world for people that are not just talking about mobile, they're not just talking the good talk, but they're actually doing it. One is Geoff, and the other are the people that we had on for the VR and AR level, for the wearables level a while back, and that was Float Mobile. Chad Udell and the guys at Float. So can't recommend enough to sign up to Geoff. Follow Geoff on Twitter if you're not already, but certainly sign up to Work Learn Mobile as well to get that information coming to you. Thank you, Geoff. There's another question.
Work Learn Mobile, just as a quick disclaimer, it's very much a sort of personal side project now. It used to be a core thing that we did as part of our team when I was working at Qualcomm, and it's now just a sort of a personal hobby. So very happy to get any feedback and suggestions, and I'll definitely get back to you, but it might take me a while. I'm just slowly putting up a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last year, and I haven't always been able to speak about. So it's coming through.
Yeah,
sorry, Craig, you had a question.
That's okay. I had a question lined up, but I think it kind of intersects with a question that Tom asked a few minutes ago. Tom, your question about what's the next iteration. So I'm kind of going to wrap both questions up in one, if I can, and really double slam Geoff with a question here. Geoff, you said it's gone quick. Can anybody else hear me? If you give us a thumbs up, Tom. Okay, we still pushing audio out. Then Geoff is having a problem though. Geoff, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So the question is, I've typed this out. In this MOOC, we've been looking at a different sort of technology each month. We've looked at AI, artificial intelligence, virtual and alternate and augmented reality, wearables. This month, we're looking at proximity beacons. What people are starting to realise as we're going through this course is actually none of these are necessarily standalone pieces of tech. What's to say that you wear something that gives you augmented reality that could be tapping into some sort of AI engine? So actually none of these are necessarily exclusive, not even at the moment, let alone in the future. Where do you see beacons going? What's next? How do you see them perhaps interfacing with other tools and technologies and systems that are out there? Or even if they just exist in their own standalone space, what do you see as being the next iteration of beacons?
So I'm a mobile guy, and I see mobile at the middle of almost everything. Beacons are part of the swirl of things around that. So actually, I would guess that most of you are using beacons every day without realizing, even now. So if you use a smartwatch or if you use a fitness tracker, the way they communicate, if you have any of these Internet of Things type of gadgets, the way they're communicating is with BLE, with Bluetooth LE. So it's already there. Everything's gone rather quiet. Are you still online?
We're still here, Geoff. Yeah, I heard every word of that. So you were saying that we're probably using beacons, or the technology that beacons is based on every day now. Watches, fitness trackers, smart watches. So yeah, I picked up all of that, and I can see that Rachel picked up on that as well. Does that answer your question, Tom? Is that what you see as being the next stage, or do you want to probe Geoff further on that?
All right. It's gone very quick. Everything's frozen on my side. I'll keep talking a bit further.
I'll try
to. For me, the thing that excites me the most about beacons is the same thing that excites me about augmented reality, which is just the connection I'm going to wait a second in case Craig kind of connects back in.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
All right. Perfect. Perfect. That was it.
Oh, sorry. So Tom was going to drop us a question into the chat pod. It looks like he has, I see. And I thought he was miming away there. I thought it would look like he was saying, I'm going to type something into the chat pod. Tom's asking, will they become so small that we can have them everywhere? Now, the beacon that I got was kind of the size of a 10-pence piece, so it was pretty small. Are you suggesting sort of ingestible small, Tom? Is this something that we could be swallowing or inserting?
There's two constraints. There's two constraints. One is power, the other is aerial. So the smaller you get, the smaller your battery, and the smaller your aerial, and those are the things that are actually the things that make a difference. The stuff that's the silicon, it's negligible. It's negligible to produce. It's negligible in size. It's got negligible software embedded in it, so that's tiny. So it's the aerial and it's the battery power. My guess is that they'll always be part of something else, but they're just the mode of communicating. Yeah. So would you ingest them? You might use Bluetooth LE if you had ingested something and needed to send a message out of your body. Might be all right. You wouldn't get too far because of the body thing, but.
I've had plenty of out-of-body experiences, all down to ingesting things, but they weren't beacons.
You just haven't had the right beacons.
Well, so I guess you mentioned batteries there. I guess if ever battery technology advances beyond where it is now, it could mean that we could have significantly more powerful batteries in a much smaller form factor, although I imagine things like this would probably be the starting point to see that type of battery technology emerge.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that it sends a signal. If the signal can travel, but it's currently about the lowest data rate we can get and still send out a signal. So my feeling is that as a technology to send messages, actually it's good. It's better than NFC. Just answering Tom's question in the chat. Do I think it's going to get radically smaller or radically different? I don't think so. I think there's a whole swarm of excitement around the Internet of Everything, or the Internet of Things, and smart devices and micro smart devices. And I think BLE will continue to be a good way that they communicate with each other. It's pretty much a standard. So I think that will continue to be the case. Whether we need to be focusing on worrying about, is it going to be a really small device? What will we do with it on the learning front? I'm not sure whether that's that important. Maybe it is, and I'm missing out something big. For me, it's really just about thinking, how can learning be attached to things? If you've got an idea where learning is attached to things, this is a way of making it happen. So is augmented reality another way of making it happen. So is QR codes. That's just a bit more clumsy way of doing that. So these are all just ways of connecting virtual to real, and a sort of weave those together. And then it's up to you to figure out, can you apply that to a learning situation? There's no reason why it's not a one-to-one, so it doesn't have to be the case that every time I walk up to the same bit of equipment I get the same message. There can be a sequence of things, so it can be a more complex series of messaging that knows who I am and what stage I'm at and is giving me the appropriate thing at that moment. You could, every morning when I walk in the door, it could be giving me a personalized message and it knows who I am. There's a bunch of things you can do with it. So in fact, we did that at Qualcomm. We rigged up doors with it, so you knew when people were coming in and out. And there we had the people carrying the beacons and the doors having a listener, because that had more battery power. So the listener had more battery power. We rigged up our coffee shop, so people who were carrying these little beacons on their belts, when you walked up to get a coffee, you could pay for it without doing anything, because your picture would appear on the checkout, and if the woman looked at you and it was your picture and you agreed the price, you just push the button, no money changed hands. So again, it's just using this messaging layer.
Thank you, Geoff. Tom's asked a question, and I'm gonna sort of marry that question up with one of the objects that's in the MOOC at the moment. A couple of months ago, I was having a conversation with Nick Lee, and Nick has taken his organisation on something of a journey, moving away from the dreaded compliance training and they're now moving towards more of a campaign, continual marketing type of approach to get the message out there about compliance. He's come up, one of the tools he's using, quite simple, are posters. These short, sharp, snappy posters, very different to what people are used to seeing in their business, pushing out these messages. And he's, one of the ideas that I suggested was, why not put some proximity beacons in the area of those posters, so that actually it's not just a one-dimensional message they're getting, there may be something multimedia that can enhance that. And his business are averse to that at the moment, not because of cost or anything, or even privacy. It was around the annoyance factor. Are people going to get pissed off getting the same message every time they walk past those posters? So Tom's mentioned about, will beacons become the new spam? And I'm just wondering, taking Tom's question there and Nick's observation about what's happening in his business, is there a potential for beacons to be, I guess the answer is yes, there is a potential for beacons to be used for spam, but how might we in the L&D field circumvent that? How could we think smartly about their use and make sure that they're not used for spam? Does it tie into what you've just said about they're intelligent and actually know if you've already received it? Could that be one way?
Sorry, can you hear me now? I somehow got muted.
Yeah.
Think about your example of the sort of becoming more of a marketing campaign. We did that. So going back to Qualcomm, my whole mission was increase the adoption of mobile. So we developed a mobile app store, and then we would run campaigns. We would run equivalent of marketing campaigns. And as each month passed, we got better and better at it, and we got slightly more enhanced tools. So although we were the L&D team, we ended up using marketing tools and sort of running campaigns. And anybody who runs campaigns will tell you, if you overdo it, people just leave. Part of the art is being interesting, not messaging the same thing all the time like a stuck record, trying to find sort of hitchhike onto topics of the moment and promote things on that. So we would have a few different sort of mailing lists that people could opt in and sign up on, and we were literally running campaigns. We were running campaigns in the sort of canteens on screens, and we would have a hook onto other people's emails and run little strap lines in the emails. And it is a little bit like that in L&D, certainly with us, where if you shift away from learning being compulsory and you're making it optional, and you define your usefulness as a team in your ability to provide optional things, you ought to be understanding who's using it, and you ought to be trying to give them what they need. So we found that we certainly totally were moving into this more marketing and edge of the spectrum. And as part of that, you need to be smart about your messaging, right? People will just block your emails; they won't respond to them anymore. And that's your own fault. So yes, there is a risk that they could be used for spamming, which is why I don't accept, I don't accept all sorts of things from phones I don't know. I don't accept people trying to connect with Bluetooth and send me Bluetooth things either. You just don't. But so there's a bit of a element of trust in that. So back to your idea with the posters, actually I think the posters are a fantastic idea, but you need to be quite careful that what you put on the posters and how you get people to hook into them. Whether we had posters with augmented reality, so we had a bunch of sort of awareness-raising posters that were just joke posters, and we would track to see how many people would use them, and we would see every time an app got loaded, we'd get a little pulse beat, so you'd know if people would stop using that poster, we'd just take it down, or we would change it.
That's interesting. That's quite clever. So it's not just a case of being able to track when they're being used and assume that they're not at other times. It can actually validate that something's not being used, it's not in the right area, the message is wrong, it's being used to death, the footfall isn't there, so you can then relocate. I never thought about it from that perspective. I guess I'd always looked at it from getting the positive data from it, and even knowing that it's not being used is still positive data. But it's quite interesting to be able to use it from it's not the right message or in the right area or have the right footfall perspective is an aspect I've not considered. So that's quite useful to bear that in mind.
I've never worked on production lines or in places where there's a lot of equipment that you need to know about. I've seen some fantastic examples of augmented reality and QR codes as well being used in those situations where you scan a piece of equipment and it's giving you live information about that piece of equipment and when it needs a service. I haven't seen beacons used in that scenario, but they would be equally good. In fact, they'd be as good or better as just the way of connecting an app to a piece of equipment. I don't know if any of the folks in the Peter or Rachel or Tom are involved in that area at all. So that's not an area I've worked in, but it would work because again, it's all about connecting something physical to something virtual.
Thanks, Geoff. Tom's asked a question here about generic apps, museum apps, zoo apps. I certainly know that there are museum apps out there that allow you, and you know, your Qualcomm was one, but I also know that there are, you know, there are museums in the UK that are benefiting and are starting to look at beacons, and you know, the museum app itself will have the beacon technology within it, so it's not a standalone app. The museum app is trained to look out for these messages from the beacons that are being shouted out. Are there any that you know of that we might, you know, that we might be aware of, any big places using them?
So let me just talk about augmented reality for a quick moment, and then I'll get back to answer that question. So exactly the same thing happened in augmented reality. So there. Initially, you could get the APIs and write your own code. So you would be using one of 2 or 3 mega libraries for your augmented reality app. But actually, you write your own app, and you just use their library to enable it. Which is why you would get apps specific to an advertising campaign or specific to a new film that was being released. And then a couple of people started producing generic apps where anybody, non-developers, could upload something that they wanted to augment, and as long as you had the app installed, it would work. So Blipper was one of those, which you've probably seen. It's been around for a while. And there are a couple of others. I think Wikitude was one, where you just install one app and anybody can put augmented reality things in. So the same thing is starting to happen with Bluetooth. So that was Tom's question. So there's an app called Lockly, L-O-C-L-Y. I haven't used it, but quite a lot of the schools, I follow quite a lot of schools people who've been trying to do work with Bluetooth LE, and they seem to use Lockly to do that. And so they've built a variety of different kinds of apps and scenarios and things, often using Lockly in the background. But as Tom said, Lockly seems to be a URL link only. I want more interaction to be possible. I don't know that. I'd thought that you could build layers of information on top of that, but I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. If you'd like, I'm happy to do a bit of research and get back to you on that.
Thank you for the offer, Geoff. I'll let Tom come back to you in the chat on that, but yeah, but thank you for that offer. There's the questions coming in.
Sorry.
No, that's okay, Kathy. You wanted to ask something?
Yeah.
Your mic's open now. We've got you.
Using beacons and then
No, I think Kathy's typing out loud. So Kathy's mentioned that she's planning to use beacons in manufacturing. I used to work on a nuclear site, enriched uranium, and there was stacks of very intricate, very, very complex machinery all over the place. It was a wonderful opportunity, but mobile phones were contraband because the signals and also the fact that you can use them to take photographs, and taking photographs of equipment that enriches uranium to kind of weapons grade level was kind of a bad thing. So wonderful opportunity, but it just wasn't the right time. I think the industry wasn't mature enough or trusting enough. So it was a good opportunity, but unfortunately, wrong manufacturing process, I think. Kathy, what are you able to share? What sort of industry you're in? What manufacturing process you're in? If you're planning to do a pilot of it, then I guess there's some support for you to do that. It might help other people to understand what battles they may be able to win. Medical devices. Okay, so you'd be looking at using beacons within a medical environment to give information on the equipment, or is it the manufacturing of the equipment before it ever gets to a medical environment? Again, I know from some of the people that are in the MOOC, they can see real benefit of using mobile for a lot of things, but they're not allowed to have mobile devices either for technical reasons or safeguarding reasons, really at the point where they could do with them. So I guess it very much depends on the device, on the equipment itself, and also the nature of the environment. One is this performance support on procedures, Kathy's saying here. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kathy.
Very good. Yeah.
Schedule, which was something you mentioned, Geoff, right at the beginning. I think of this Hangout you mentioned, but you could see the benefit of being able to send out information on schedule, on maintenance schedules.
And what I like about things like that is you're moving above the beacon sending tiny data and you're hooking it into something bigger. So there's something bigger, which is you've got back-end systems that are reminding you about the maintenance schedule, or you've got performance support information about that room or that piece of equipment. And it's just tapping into these bigger, more complex things. And I think that's probably where it's actually the most powerful. I think where we're just experimenting with beacons and putting them places and treasure hunts, I think that's a great thing to get started with and test it out. But for a workplace, probably when you're weaving it into some bigger cycle of things you need to be doing, that's where you get the real gains in performance improvement.
Yeah, and I guess it's also where you probably get the most support as well. We continually hear about, doing L&D activities that fit in with the business, speak the language of the business, that aid the business in doing its core business. So, as you mentioned, if you can tie into those, what the business does for its core values and its core processes, all the better, more likely to get more support for other things if you're doing that.
Yeah, and we, again, back to the Qualcomm story, we were very lucky because as part of this mobile team, we were given freedom to. We didn't come with a legacy of existing training we had to deliver. There were other teams who were delivering that. We came in to try and make an impact in new ways, and so we ended up pivoting and focusing almost all on sort of performance support or quite current business need, and trying to see what you could do with technology or mobile that would help those business needs. So sometimes it was about top execs giving them critical information at the moment they wanted. Sometimes it was about all the most junior employees and supporting them. But it was almost always hooking into a very current business need, and that definitely helped us.
That makes sense. Ladies, gents, I'm mindful we've just entered kind of the last 10 minutes. It's 10 to 9 here in the UK. It'll be 10 to something wherever you are, hopefully. So I just wanted to kind of start to round up. First, before I do that, though, I wanted to give everybody another opportunity to throw any more questions into the chat panel, or indeed to open up your mic and fire those questions at Geoff in the last few minutes. While you're doing that, I'm also going to be dropping in some links that have probably disappeared up the page now. One of the things about Hangout is that once it's gone, it's gone. This has been recorded, but all you will get is the video feed and the audio feed. The chat feed is actually lost. So what you might want to do is just have a scroll up and down that chat bar, see if there are any links in there, and open them now in a new window. Otherwise, it will be a bit of a shame because they will be lost once this Hangout finishes. So if you want to fire any questions at Geoff now, please do so. I'm going to be dropping some links in there. I've just dropped a link in to the museum app that Geoff's mentioned a few times. I've just dropped a link into Geoff's Twitter feed. And once again, I'm also just dropping a link into Work Learn Mobile, which is, as Geoff said, is something of a pet side project at the moment. And Geoff's just said it'll all be on Work Learn Mobile, and there's the link to it as well. So
yes, I'll finish this article and put it up there, and there'll be links to all of these things and the videos all in there. There'll be 2 or 3 different pages between them. All of this will be on there. So if there's one thing you remember, go and check out Work Learn Mobile, and it'll be on there. Thank
you, Geoff. Thank you. And when we follow up after this Hangout is finished, there's an email that goes out pointing people to the recording. I'll also make sure that we direct people to Work Learn Mobile as well. So it won't just be the participants on tonight's Hangout. It will be all the participants in the MOOC that will get directed towards that. Because of course, not everybody can make these things. It may not fit with their schedule. Are there any closing questions before I... Oh, Tom's just waded in there. Any software to take advantage of beacons? He's mentioned Adobe or Articulate, but are you aware of anything, perhaps more technology that might be more high street to many instructional designers that's tapping into beacons, Geoff?
No, but I haven't, but also there hasn't been a particularly good history of the software that works with instructional designers being very forward-thinking in adopting new technologies. Quite often the new technologies come from somewhere else entirely, and it can be quite a long time. And if you think of how long it took I don't know, storyline articulate to even do mobile nicely relative to where L&D was trying to do things on mobile. So I think I often end up finding the answers not in that, but in other sectors, in retail or in gamification or in other places.
And
but I don't have a good answer.
If we look back over this MOOC, you know, we've had VR and AR, AI, wearables, proximity beacons. None of them have their roots in learning and development. They've come from other spaces, gaming, or from computer science, or from, you know, particularly with wearables. There seems to be a lot, you know, the fitness tracking industry and the health industry is not the only one that's big into them, but it seems to be the one that people can buy into more because they've seen, you know, they've maybe got a Fitbit or a Basis or something like that. So yeah, I'd align with that, Geoff, that we may our own stomping ground may not be the place to look for innovation. Hence the course is called Elearning, Beyond the Next Button.
Peter, you asked whether all the beacons are the same or they're vendor specific. Great question, and the answer is ish. The answer is a mix. So the actual message they send out is standardized. Well, first of all, the technology, the BLE technology, the Bluetooth Smart technology, Bluetooth Smart, Bluetooth LE, that is a total standard. The format of the data that gets passed backwards and forwards at a base level is standard, although some beacons have added additional layers on top of that and additional data on top of that, which is not standard. So probably if you got a beacon sniffing app, it would pick up data from any beacon. Probably in most cases it would understand the data, but there'd be some cases where it'd be carrying additional payload that it wouldn't. I haven't tried that, but that's my theory. So the Bluetooth LE is total standard. The way of passing data is totally standard, but there are layers on top of that where some vendors have done some specific things which aren't standard.
Thank you, Geoff. Thank you, Peter. Any more questions going to flood in those last few minutes, those precious minutes?
Oh, I don't know about that. Beacons that are not, books are not. In fact, the word iBeacon is slightly misleading, because iBeacon initially wasn't even a beacon. It was just Apple's additional services on top of the basic Bluetooth LE, which they were calling iBeacon, and then beacon manufacturers were had to validate that their beacon was iBeacon ready, even though the beacons were there first. So iBeacon is a slight misnomer in that it's not the name of beacons; it's the name of an Apple-imposed, slightly wraparound service on top of beacons. But sometimes the word iBeacon, I often use the word iBeacon as a shorthand, but actually, if you're being accurate about it, you should be rather talking about Bluetooth beacons or Bluetooth LE or Bluetooth Smart or BLE as that's actually the generic term. iBeacon is Apple's wrap around it. To answer your question, though, I haven't read any good books on that. You've read In a Nutshell. Was it good?
Yeah. Ish.
Very good. And Peter, you're talking about using Wi-Fi networks, similar purposes. So we've also done a lot of work triangulating with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is much stronger. The signals are much stronger. You have them much further apart. There's different issues with bouncing and things with Wi-Fi than you get with Bluetooth LE. They were okay. We found we were much more accurate with the Bluetooth LE, but we put way more of them around. Wi-Fi, obviously, you need a different set of infrastructure around them if you want to use Wi-Fi hubs as positional things. So in that scenario, the hub that's sending out the message has got a lot more power coming to it, because that is the mega source. Whereas the whole thing with the beacons is the thing that's sending out the message is low power, small, tiny. So it's sort of the opposite. It's sort of the opposite way around. We were working with a team at Qualcomm who were doing triangulation with the actual Wi-Fi routers, because they had mapped out some buildings where the Wi-Fis were in the same position on every floor. So it was a 30-story, no, it wasn't, 10-story building, and on each floor the mapping was exactly the same. And so they would, and the names of the Wi-Fi routers were the same. And so they were doing exactly that. It wasn't quite as accurate, but the infrastructure was there already. Sorry, that was off on a tangent about Wi-Fi, but I'm happy to discuss that too.
It was an answer to Peter's question, so thank you, Geoff, thank you, Peter. Folks, it is now 9 p.m. Poor Geoff has probably turned his webcam off because there's no light where he is. For those of you who joined us late, Geoff's joining us from his front doorstep because he's locked himself out the house, but fortunately had enough Wi-Fi signal to carry on. He's getting colder. Somebody call out the paramedics to Geoff, get him a silver foil blanket or something like that, or send him down to the soup kitchen because he's freezing. So let's let Geoff get off and get warm and get back into his house. Folks, for those of you that have joined us via the MOOC, this recording will be wrapped up and will be communicated out via the usual channels that I've got my weekly nudge emails. For those of you that just happened to come across this Hangout, thank you, really appreciate it. If you follow me on YouTube, you'll find that overnight, possibly even an hour or so, the recording for this is wrapped up on YouTube if you want to go back and take a look at it. Could I ask you all if you would join me in the chat panel and saying a huge warm, with the emphasis on the warm, thank you to Geoff for joining us at a pretty hectic time of day for him. Geoff, thank you very, very, very much indeed. I know you're always keen to get out there and talk about what you've done and move people's thinking along. You've not let me down again this evening, and under particularly tricky conditions as well. Thank you from everyone at HT2, from Ben and Alan and myself. A big thanks, and I'm sure a big thanks from everybody that's joined us this evening as well. Geoff, you're a star. Thank you very much.